Hi everybody, a very warm welcome back to my channel, Nelly the Narcissist, and a very warm welcome to anybody that is new that's tuning in today. I'm not a narcissist, but as well as these podcasts, I am the creator of comedy skits that center around my character, who is Nelly the Narcissist. These are made specifically for survivors, so all of the links I'm going to put below in the description box, as you're not going to see anything quite like these anywhere else. So in today's podcast, we're going to be delving into a topic that very few people talk about, but one that I know that many of you that have experienced malignant narcissists have encountered. And we're going to talk about the mysterious and terrifying phenomenon of dark, shadowy figures that appear at night, often when you are sleeping, but not when you're sleeping, when you're fully awake in the bedroom, and these figures are connected to the narcissist. If you have ever experienced this, I want you to know right now that you are not alone and you're definitely not crazy. So my channel, it focuses a lot on malignant narcissists because number one, I dealt with one of these, and they're the most wicked, dangerous, and definitely plain evil individuals that you're ever going to come in contact with. There is one thing in common for pretty much every single survivor of a malignant narcissist. And that is the extreme level spiritual experience and fight for survival and the piercing of a veil to a whole new dimension of existence that we never knew existed. And a lot of supernatural things happen around these people when you get close to them, and especially when you live with one of them. The truth is, very few channels are prepared to talk about it, and very few channels actually also focus on malignant narcissists. And another real truth, if you're a psychologist and you've never had any experience with one of these, then there's no possibility of truly discussing them. Because you don't know the working of the spiritual aspect, or indeed the workings of the existence of spiritual corruption and darkness and the nature of evil. There are countless survivors, basically, of narcissistic abuse who have seen these shadow figures. And most are going to be too afraid to speak about them because they're scared that no one's going to believe them, or worse, they're going to be labelled as crazy delusional. And sometimes we do gaslight ourselves. We try to convince ourselves that we didn't see what we actually did see. But let me tell you, when you hear the same story over and over again from people across the world, it's time to actually stop dismissing these accounts. Psychology will often label this kind of thing as victim psychosis. But how can it be psychosis if so many people are saying the exact same thing? Psychotic hallucinations are typically fragmented and they're highly individual. They are not repeatable. They don't follow the same pattern from person to person, and yet this phenomenon, it does. People describe the same shapes, the same darkness, the same feeling of terror. And it's not just one culture or one country, because I've heard stories from America to Japan, from Kazakhstan to Brazil, everywhere. These aren't cultural hallucinations, they're global. And it's happening everywhere that malignant narcissists actually are living and breathing. And here is what's common. So a survivor will often wake up in the middle of the night and they'll see a dark, shadowy figure in their room. And it's often while the narcissist is sleeping in the bed next to them, but sometimes it happens, like I said, after the survivor has left the narcissist. And these figures, they might not have clear features, but the feeling that they bring into the room is unmistakable because it's oppressive, it's terrifying. And it's not a dream, it's not sleep paralysis. It's something else. And this leads me actually to the work of Jerry Marzinski, who's a retired psychotherapist, and he worked with schizophrenic patients for over 35 years. And he found that the voices that these patients heard, they always intensified at nighttime, especially between 3 and 4 a.m. And this is around the time that many people will call the witching hour, which is associated with heightened spiritual activity. Even though there is some debate to when exactly the witching hour is. Some say it's midnight, some say it's midnight to 3 a.m., others say it's 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. Anyway, for me, I feel like it's more around 3 and 4 a.m. Now, I spoke with Jerry and he didn't know about the term the witching hour. But he confirmed that there was the same pattern, that his patients were tormented the most during these hours. So what's more, some of them could actually see the entities behind the voices, and they appeared as dark, shadowy figures standing in the room, or even behind other patients. Now, I believe that these shadowy beings that abuse survivors are the same entities that Jerry's patients saw, the same dark entities. And what's more is that these entities always have the same theme. They are anti-love, they're anti-God, and they're anti-truth. They drain people, they lie, and they're spiritual parasites. And malignant narcissists, I see that they serve as portals for them. I never personally saw shadow figures at night around the narcissist, but I can tell you of some significant things that did happen at night. And the first to note is that I always felt a supernatural presence in the house at night time with the narcissist present. And so much so, there was a corridor just outside the bedroom on the way to the bathroom. And I never actually wanted to get up in the night and enter that corridor. And it wasn't just me, because a friend of mine that stayed in the house for a few days also said that she was bothered by that corridor before I'd even mentioned it. And the narcissist had told me about a very tall, dark figure that used to enter our bedroom through the corridor. And I wasn't actually scared by these stories at the time because I didn't really believe the narcissist. But I must say that I still didn't like entering that corridor at night. But one night I got up and I walked to go to the bathroom. So I went through the corridor and I never turned on a light as I didn't want to disturb anybody. And what happened is I got really spooked because as I walked forward, imagine that you're in the dark and you walk into a wall or a tall bookshelf or something. And your natural reaction is to sort of jump and bring your arms up to protect your face. And that's exactly what I did. I walked in the corridor and I thought that I hit a wall or something. I thought I'd gone too far. And my immediate reaction was to bring my hands up. It really took me by surprise because I'd walked into something and I felt it, but there was nothing that was actually there. And another time I was in bed and the narcissist was close by and I had a portable speaker that was operated via Bluetooth, and I would have to go and physically turn it on. It was linked to my phone. It never ever turned itself on without me having to go and turn it on. But one night, whilst I was sleeping, it turned itself on, and as it turns on, it talks. Now, disorientated, I woke up and I was shocked. What on earth is going on? What is that? Okay, it's a speaker talking to me. I checked the time on my phone and it was 04:04 a.m. I thought that that was kind of strange and it struck me as being significant. And the worst and actually the heaviest experience that I've ever had, it came at night post-separation with a narcissist, and it was within the first week that I was back in my country. And I had what was the most basically terrifying nightmare of my life, but this wasn't an ordinary nightmare at all. I've had loads of nightmares in my life, and I feel like I know the difference between a nightmare and something that actually happened. Now, it's very common when you wake up, when you've had a nightmare, you can feel yourself a bit heavy, you can feel your energy affected. But I've never ever had a nightmare affect me for over 24 hours. I felt terrible all day. And what I saw in this nightmare were demonic entities, and the narcissist was there as well. And they'd all jumped on my body and they were dragging me down, 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 down. I felt like they were basically trying to drag me to hell. That's what it felt like. And it was much more real than a regular nightmare. And I felt it affect my body and my energy for this abnormal amount of time. It was very dark and oppressive, like a cloud that was really heavy. It was really hard to shake it off of me. And this was a major event that happened that gave me even firmer clarity that the narcissist did have major demonic entity attachments and maybe a possession. And what I mean is these entities, they'd been working through the narcissist all along, and they're still working through the narcissist. And I had been their food source for a very long time, and they didn't like to give it up. And I wouldn't say this if I didn't really feel that it was this, but that night I know I was astrally attacked. And what was even scarier at the time was my family, the same night that this happened to me, they knew nothing about it, but they were sleeping and they'd been woken up by a really terrifying sound that sounded like a horror film. They were terrified. They honestly thought that some sort of a creature was at the door. And they realised that it came out of our little dog. Now this little dog is a little cute poppet, you know, she's got a high-pitched shrieking bark. And my dad said, you would never ever have believed that that sound could have been inside of her. And I mean, my family had been really shaken by this. It was not normal. And the weird thing is, this happened and occurred at exactly the same time. And for one time only, that night that I had that nightmare, that was not really a nightmare. So it's believed that at nighttime, the vibrations, they slow down. And so it makes sense because most people obviously sleep at night. So there's less activity. So the energy and the vibrations are going to be a lot more still. And it's thought that the veil between the physical and the spiritual worlds, it becomes thinner. So it makes it easier then for spirits or energy from other realms to interact with our own world. So the term that I'm saying, veil, here is crucial because most people, they're not aware that anything beyond this physical reality exists. And why? Because there's a veil. There's this unseen barrier that obscures our perception of what lies beyond. So unless someone has the opportunity, you know, or the experience to pierce that veil, how could they possibly know what's on the other side? So the veil functions like a screen or a filter between this material world that we perceive with our senses and the spiritual and the metaphysical dimensions. And just because we can't see those realms, or we aren't aware that they exist, it doesn't mean that they're not there. It just means that we haven't pierced the veil that would allow us to perceive beyond the ordinary reality. And this becomes particularly unsettling in the presence of a malignant narcissist, because for somebody who has never glimpsed the greater spiritual reality, this experience can be profoundly disturbing. Because through the narcissist, we are connected only to spiritual darkness. And when that's all that we encounter, when our only contact with the unseen realms is through that shadowy force, it's easy to fall into fear because we begin to believe that we're seeing the full truth, that this darkness is all that there is. The narcissist seems to become more powerful. We consider it like this. But if the darkness exists, then so must the light. The veil doesn't just conceal the shadow, it also hides the brilliance of the light beyond it. And fear comes only from seeing a part of the picture. There are many survivors of malignant narcissists who, you know, despite enduring immense darkness, they come to realize that the light side also exists. And it not only exists, but it actively reaches out to them to help them. And they come to understand that they are not alone, that there are spiritual forces of guidance and protection and love working quietly but powerfully on their behalf. And this is perhaps one of the most beautiful and redemptive aspects of the journey when we're in the depths of that psychological and spiritual captivity, when we are being held and crushed by the weight of the narcissist energy and their suppression. It can feel as though that darkness has complete and total domination. Now, I would like to bring in a little more depth to this discussion, and I want to speak about Dion Fortune. And I know that some of you don't like me speaking about occultists, but she was also a psychologist. I think that it's very relevant because she mapped out the patterns that we're talking about. She mapped it out in her book, Psychic Self-Defense. And it was written for people who were experiencing the kind of unseen psychological and spiritual assaults that basically most of the world refuses to talk about. And she warned about the power of this suggestion of reality of emotional vampirism and the way that etheric projections, meaning energetic or spiritual extensions of somebody's will, can take on real perceivable forms. Not dreams and not delusions, real forces. And what she described almost a century ago, it mirrors exactly what survivors of narcissistic abuse describe today. These are dark, shadowy figures that you see in the room. And John Fortune believed that they may be entities or thought forms that are born out of negative psychic energy. And they're not random. They're generated, sometimes unconsciously, but other times deliberately, by people who are spiritually corrupted and emotionally toxic and psychically vampiric. These oppressive presences, they're not hallucinations. They're actually manifestations of something deeper. It's spiritual parasitism. And it's exactly the same kind of dynamic that we see in malignant narcissists, who feed off of your light and your peace and your soul force. Dion Fortune, she was one basically of the first people to openly speak about psychic attacks in the West, not as fantasy or superstition, but literally as a form of psychological and spiritual violence. And she describes it as a deliberate or unconscious projection of destructive energy from one person to another. And that energy can take on the form of obsessive thought or emotional possession. And here is, what is key. She stressed that psychic attack, it doesn't come from strangers or ritual magicians. It comes from people in our lives, people that we have a strong emotional charge with. People who envy, who hate us, who resent us, who are obsessed with us. Does that sound familiar? And in her own words, she said that the commonest source of attack is from a person who you have been in very close emotional association with. And when I think about this in context of narcissistic abuse and these relationships, these are people who form intense energetic bonds with their victims, who obsess over them, they control them, and they fuse with them. And according to Fortune, is the perfect setup for a psychic parasite-host dynamic. And she warned that psychic attackers can work through the subconscious mind, influencing your dreams, your thoughts, and even your health. And you may feel drained, depressed, panicked, or plagued by these strange images or impulses that don't feel like your own. If you've actually seen a dark figure in your home or your bedroom, then you're not imagining it, because you're experiencing a pattern that humanity has actually tried to name. And when this appears around a narcissist, you are not just witnessing trauma. You're actually witnessing a spiritual battle, and you're witnessing, I believe, a spiritual parasite. And what I'm hearing from survivors, it's not rare, because these stories, they go back thousands of years and they show up in cultures all over the world. But what I really need you to know and to remember is that we don't need to be afraid of that darkness. And yes, these forces, they can feel really overwhelming. They can seem scary, they can seem powerful, but they feed on fear. And fear is their currency. And they only have power over us when we're afraid. And this is what they want. They want to frighten us into submission. But when we turn our face towards the light, we let those kinds of shadows fall behind us. And that's how we begin to reclaim our power, not by fighting darkness directly, but choosing to align with the light. And the truth is, the light is infinitely more powerful. It doesn't need to scream, it doesn't need to threaten, and it doesn't need to dominate anybody, because it simply is. It's always present. And the moment that we stop giving fear our energy, we actually start reclaiming our power. And the darkness basically starts to lose its grip on us. So if you have seen those shadows, or you felt that dark presence, you're not alone. You're not losing your mind. You're seeing what is truly there. And just as there are dark energies, remember there's also light. There is divine love, and there is support that's waiting to come in as soon as we start choosing it and protecting ourselves and removing what is not of the light from our lives, removing the parasites. I know that this was a heavy topic today, but I hope that it's brought you some clarity and validation. And if you have experienced this yourself, then please feel free to leave a comment below. I spoke about Jerry Marzinski earlier in this podcast because I have spoken to him and I'm going to be posting that video very soon. And the reason that I wanted to speak with him and the reason why I'm interested in his work is because I see so many parallels and crossovers between what schizophrenics experience through all of his body of research that he's done for over 35 years and the stories and the reports of survivors of malignant narcissists. There are so many patterns and there are so many crossovers which make me believe that it's actually one in the same. And I believe that he has experienced the same entities and the schizophrenic patients are experiencing the same entities as what we as survivors of malignant narcissists have come in contact with. I did speak with Jerry and I will be posting that video very soon, so stay tuned for that one. For now, thanks so much for watching, take care, sending love, and I will see you all again next week.